Oran Park. It was a wonderful circuit, one which brought so many memories and lots of great racing, as well as a fancy bridge structure. Not many tracks can claim they have that as a feature. However, the track would stay quiet after 2008, with it being demolished and turned into a housing redevelopment. Disappointing for sure. However, the organisers of the V8 Supercars recognised that with Sydney being a revered destination which had huge local as well as global appeal, with the departure of the Sydney-based Oran Park track, a new event was needed to galvanise this important market. So the idea of a street circuit that would prove to be the climax of the season was put forward. Let's see what they came up with. The Homebush Street Circuit, or Sydney Olympic Park Street Circuit, whichever name you prefer to pick. 3.4 kilometres / 2.1 miles of very demanding Australian tarmac. A track which would host races and moments that would live in the minds of racing fans all over the world from 2009 to 2016. The straight doesn't look very wide initially, but luckily for the drivers it dramatically widened as you headed to turn 1. So wide in fact that it became the widest section of racetrack in Australian motorsport. All of this meant the drivers had a prime opportunity to make a pass stick, for which they took the chance with open arms. Sometimes with good consequences, other times not so much. However, this corner was tricky by yourself. Turn 1 featured a downhill braking zone which obviously made braking for the corner more difficult. Now if you enjoyed the width of this track, then you're not going to be as much of a fan of, well, pretty much the rest of the track, because the rest of it is pretty narrow. Along the straight you go before heading to a chicane, a 3-tiered chicane where you went left, right, and then into a much more open left. Now the chicane was perhaps necessary. It would have been a very fast corner by street track standards, and with not much room to push the walls back for extra runoff space. Although the chicane does seem a bit clunky. Also, the layout of the corner cutting prevention tyres was modified as the years went on. This particular version, used in 2015, wasn't maybe the most effective solution at achieving its primary purpose. Anyway, it's time for the corner that all of you probably know better as "They're all in the fence." However, this very iconic moment was under very different circumstances and doesn't at all reflect what a brilliant corner this one is. The turn, officially known as the King G Sweep, was a very tricky turn, extremely narrow, fast, with no camber to the road at all, which led to cars losing the rear end and hitting the wall. Now whilst most people remember this corner as the one where several cars piled into the wall, I remember it better from when an Aussie racing car driven by Brendan Tucker flipped over 8.5 times. I'm not sure that's what anybody envisioned when they either designed or experienced the corner firsthand. However, this is Aussie racing cars for you, and usually anything happens in that series. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw one car upside down on top of another car at some point in that championship's future. Although that's why this series is amazing. Anyway, let's not get sidetracked by these things. Back to the track. If you love tricky chicanes, then this will be right up your alley. Whilst not the fastest chicane in racing, the drivers still need to take good speed into there, threading the eye of a needle and quite often not being able to find it. It's especially difficult when you've got to get through there on dry tyres on a very shiny wet surface, as Greg Murphy demonstrates here. Right, what's the next part of the track? Oh goodness me! Next up is, in my opinion, the best corner on the track, and I'd even go as far as saying it's one of my favourite corners on any street circuit, which, for anyone who may know the layout of this track, that may surprise you. It's the creatively titled Fuso Trucks Corner. So why is it so good? Well, from a technicality point of view, this has to be one of the rarest sorts of corners you'll find on a racetrack, period, let alone a street circuit. It's got a lot of negative camber where the track and the phenomenon known as gravity is actively working against the car and driver away from the apex of the corner. Then the turn's interesting elevation changes mean that the lowest point of the corner is the closest to the car absorbing tyre barrier, which if you get into it, then you're very fortunate if you bounce off it and keep going. The Fuso truck's corner is also quite fast, meaning if you want to get the very maximum out of it, you have to play a risky yet ultimately necessary game of chicken with the barrier. Plus, it's one of the easier places on the track to overtake. Although easier doesn't necessarily mean straightforward. A fantastic corner this one, there's very little like this on conventional racetracks. This example might even be the only one of its kind on street circuits, although doubtlessly you'll let me know in the comment section if I'm wrong, for which I more than likely am. To be honest, the fact that that corner is as amazing as it is a especially good thing considering the rest of the lap is somewhat samey. All of them are 90-degree corners, either going left or right. The first one, the Big Pond corner, is perhaps the most difficult 90-degree corner on any street track. Perhaps because of the braking zone, which is rather undulating, meaning it's quite difficult to get the braking zone spot on, especially on the limit. Also, there were quite a lot of white lines on the road there, which meant, when wet, they were quite slippery. Also not helping the driver's cause, which is probably why a lot of them ended up in the runoff area there. Into turn 10, which is known as turn 10 because as far as I can tell, this is the only corner on the track which doesn't have a sponsor for it. Poor turn 10, all it wanted was to be given an interesting name. Perhaps for the sake of this video, I'll give it one. The Van Gisbergen, mostly because Van Gisbergen had a collision with a medical car just after this corner. I mean, he couldn't do a whole lot about it because his steering was controlled about 10% by him and 90% by the car after sustaining damage earlier on. Turn 11 can be a good passing zone on this track, whilst the final two turns in the Armour All corner and Telstra corner round off the lap. Fairly nondescript these turns. I mean, they're 90-degree corners at the end of the day, and I've talked about them enough in this series, and I'm more than likely going to have to talk about them in the future, so let's just leave it there for the sake of this video. In terms of the pit lane, possibly one of the best in certain aspects by street track standards. The pit entry is marked with some utterly terrifying cones the size of an hors d'oeuvre. No wait, terrifying isn't the word I'm looking for here. The pit exit is fantastic, the smoothest merger back onto a live track I've seen so far in this series. Assisted by the extra width of this straight, but still it more than does the job. The only area where this pit lane does fall down is the width span of it. Unfortunately, it's incredibly narrow, not at all helpful when you've got cars as big as these going through it. Now, this event held some utterly iconic moments in its history and had some absolutely brilliant races, as well as some really short ones due to horrendous levels of rain. The issue though is that despite all of this drama and all of this excitement that the event brought, the event was apparently costing too much to run, and even a plan to try and shorten the layout was explored, but to no avail. So sadly, 2016 would mark the end of the Sydney 500 and the Sydney Olympic Park Street Circuit. To me, this track's life is a bit like a holiday that you've gone on for a fair number of years. You love every aspect of that place and wouldn't change a thing, always desperate to go back and experience more. Yet for whatever reason, it's no longer possible to do so. It's the same with this track. Unlike a lot of other tracks I've had featured in this series, the Sydney Olympic Park has a big legacy with racing fans. Was that helped by it being the final round of the championship? Possibly so. Yet there's no denying the fact that this tarmac has created viral moments that have lived on and will continue to live on for generations to come. Either way, that's going to be it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. What did you think about this track? Say down in the comment section, along with any other street tracks you'd like to see featured in this series. However, until the next video, enjoy the rest of your day.